Tonight, we welcome Mike Hughes. Mike has been a field forester for over 35 years, the last 30 being with the Colorado State Forest Service. He has a wealth of experience helping private landowners achieve stewardship goals for their properties. He has a BS in forestry from Southern Illinois University and an MS in forest engineering from the University of Idaho. And also, Mike has earned the name of Mr. Christmas Tree because he has picked out the state capital Christmas trees for over 25 years. So please join me in welcoming Mike Hughes.
Well, thank you again for letting me be here, and especially to Jesse and John. Like I said, my name is Mike Hughes, and I'm with the Fort Collins field office of the Colorado State Forest Service. Many of these slides I'm going to use tonight, I did borrow from Danielle, and thank you, Danielle, for that. But I'm going to talk to you guys about the Colorado State Forest Service, as well as Colorado State's forests. And I'm gonna end before 8 o'clock because I want you guys to ask me questions. I actually like questions, as long as you guys don't make them too hard. So I want to leave plenty of time for questions. So I am going to go through this presentation fairly quickly since it's already 7:30. But the Colorado State Forest Service, that's the mission. I think Jesse put that in the announcement for my presentation. The main thing I wanted to say is there at the bottom is that we are not the U.S. Forest Service. We get confused a lot with the United States Forest Service. And I say that because, as you all know, Colorado is filled with national forests. And they are all managed by the U.S. Forest Service. Now, we work with the U.S. Forest Service sometimes, but we don't have direct administration over the national forests. That's the role of the Federal Forest Service. But the Colorado State Forest Service has 4 areas. And the Fort Collins Field Office, of course, is in the northeast area. But there's about 16 to 17 field offices throughout the state. The next closest one is in Boulder for us. And probably the furthest one, as you can see, is all the way down in Durango. But the Fort Collins Field Office covers not only Larimer County, but about 6 counties out to the east. Now, we don't work a lot in those counties, at least as compared to Larimer County, but they all are part of our jurisdiction, those 6 counties. I like this slide that Danielle gave me, and so I put it in. And I'm, as Jesse mentioned, I've been with the Colorado State Forest Service. Well, I've been a forester for over 35 years, but I've been with the State Forest Service about 30. And I'm pretty proud of the agency that I work with. And I hope we are making a positive impact on Colorado's forests. We are part of Colorado State University. CSU, and some of you may already know this, but CSU is a land-grant university, and its forestry branch is the Colorado State Forest Service. About 4 other states in the nation have a similar setup to Colorado in that their land-grant university houses their state forestry department. We are like Extension, but we're not. And I say we're like Extension because we are outreach. We service the citizens of Colorado and their tree and forest needs. Specifically, my job is I work with a lot of forest landowners and discuss with them their forests, the condition of their forests, what they would like to see out of their forests, and that sort of thing. So I tell folks that I feel like a teacher sometimes. My mom was a teacher a long time ago, and I think she passed on those genes because I do like to share knowledge with folks, in particular with forest landowners. I like to talk about trees and such, and as do my counterparts that I work here at the State Forest Service. But anyway, we work with children as well, and that's a big part of Danielle's job. She's our project learning tree coordinator, and that's another fun part of working with the Colorado State Forest Service is being able to work with kids and show them, you know, all the neat things that both trees and forests provide. So I hope you're going to find by the end of this presentation that forestry is a fun job, and I've enjoyed it quite a bit over the last 30 years. I wanted to point out a few things though about how Colorado is set up in its forests. As most of you know, most of the forests are owned by the federal government, but it should be noted that almost a third of the forests in Colorado are privately owned. Particularly if you put private with state, which we don't have a lot of state forests in Colorado, but if you put that together with private, then we do surpass that 1/3 proportion of the state. And this is how it looks on the map. And I should point out too, folks, that, you know, I'm talking about, you know, forests, the rural traditional forests. Now, it should be noted that there are also urban forests that are not really depicted on this map, which we also work with. We work with a lot of towns and cities. Many cities have their own city forestry department and city foresters, but a lot of the smaller towns don't. So we work a lot with them as well. So those urban forests are important, and the State Forest Service works with them as well. But getting back to the traditional forests, many of our forests are set up along this way. In other words, the characteristics of our forests rely heavily on elevation. Lower forests, as you guys, and many of you know this maybe already, is where you see a lot of the ponderosa pine or pinyon juniper type forests. But then, of course, as you move up in elevation, those species and those characteristics change, and we get in more into a mixed forest where we pick up fir and lodgepole pine. And then as we go even higher in elevation, we get into the spruce fir. And, you know, some of these slides have numbers, and I'm not going to go into the numbers really tonight, but I just wanted to point out that, you know, that this shows some of the different acreages of the different forests. I'm sorry, that previous slide, you know, was talked about the ownership. Let me go back a couple. That talked about ownership, and I jumped ahead a little bit. But this slide, which looks similar, talks about the actual species makeup of our forests. And as you can see, you know, we've got quite a mix. Now, I will say that Colorado's forests have a variety, but if any of you are familiar with other states, the variety actually is not as great as, say, like in states out east, or even states like California and Oregon, which have even more of a large species mix. And again, these are numbers, which I'm not going to go into, but it says here that both aspen and pinyon juniper each make up about 21% of Colorado's forests. And right behind that is spruce fir. And I will say, that's statewide. That's going to differ, though, specifically for Larimer County, for instance. I like this slide, folks, because it does talk about the importance of Colorado's forests. Here it says that, the outdoor recreation, which is a big part of Colorado's forests, generate over 500,000 jobs for the state. And, you all may already know that, but it is, to see that number is quite impressive. And, our forests are important, but they're also, as you guys may know, in danger. We've seen, particularly in the last 15 to 20 years, a lot of issues happening with our forests. And the two main I'm talking about, of course, are insects and disease, but mountain pine beetle and spruce beetle being two of the biggest insect impactors of our forests. And then the second being wildfire. And so, to be frank and blunt with you, and you may know this already, but our forests are in trouble. And we need to do a better job. That's what our state forest service, our state forester said in an interview with our forest health report, is that we're not doing a good enough job caring for our forests. And I will say that I think that we actually do take them for granted a little bit. Many of our forests are too thick. Many of our forests are too old. And not that I'm age discriminating here, but I'm saying that we need a better mix of old forests with young forests and intermediate age forests. The other thing is our forests are in a lot of ways not diverse enough. We've got a lot of lodgepole pine monocultures. What I mean by that is hillsides that the only species there is lodgepole pine. And in some areas, like in Grand County and in the Vail Valley, a lot of those lodgepole pine monocultures are now dead because of bark beetle. But getting back to what recreation does for us, again, just a few numbers here, but almost 20% of our labor force is in recreation or tied to our forests, and about 10% of Colorado's GDP is tied for it. And again, about 62, the total impact being, I believe that's $62 million. But anyway, again, there's the good, and this is a pretty picture of aspen that we love to see, particularly when we hike our forests and when we recreate in our forests. By the way, this next slide is going to tell you just a little bit about why leaves do turn color. I'm not going to go all into it. It's a very busy slide, and it's not something that you could, totally read. But basically, when days get shorter and temperatures get colder, chlorophyll stops being produced in the leaves, and then other sugars get produced, and that's what changes the leaves' color. But this is the bad, and you maybe saw some of this, or you probably did see some of this last fall, late last summer with the Cameron Peak fire. You know, if you combine that fire with the Hyde Park fire of 2012, you know, we're getting close to 500,000 acres in Larimer County. And well, close to 400,000 anyway. And that's a big chunk of Larimer County, at least a big chunk of Larimer County's forests have been tied up in those two fires. And so then you see, this is the aftermath. And this is what a big part of my job is right now, is talking to people about what to do with this situation. You know, I know it does look kind of like a moonscape with a lot of dead black sticks. And, you know, I talk honestly with landowners that, you know, that forest is not going to change overnight. And particularly in Colorado, because of Colorado's short growing season in harsh conditions. What I mean by harsh conditions is that, you know, we don't get a lot of moisture here in parts of Larimer County and even other parts of the state. And because of that, that slows down recovery after a fire or even an insect or disease epidemic. So, but the good news is that, and what I tell people is that that picture right there was taken right after a fire or within weeks after a fire. And literally that's when the forest looks the worst, is right after a fire or an insect or disease epidemic. Literally this spring, particularly with all the moisture we've had, you're going to see a lot of green up in that picture. So, and each year it's going to get better and better. But I do talk to landowners about how they can help with that change and that improvement, and particularly what they can do to address the erosion issue. And you've all heard about, you know, post-fire erosion problems that happen, and particularly sedimentation into our streams and creeks, and really posing a problem for not only our drinking water, but for our aquatic species. But we also have, as you guys know, insects and disease problems. And most recently, spruce beetle in our higher elevation forests. We're seeing some of it here in Larimer County, in the western part of the county, but it's really been impactful in where we see much more spruce fir, which is in the southwest part of the state. And so again, you know, we're looking at what we can do to, you know, help Mother Nature to again recoup, so to speak, and prepare for our next forest. And there's a number of things we can do. I'm not going to go all into it tonight because of time constraints, but I just wanted to mainly say that a big part of our job here at the Colorado State Forest Service is working with landowners, working with cooperators about addressing this, and being, and I should say too, being on both ends. Now, this is kind of a reactionary end of things, but what we want to do is get on the other end of it and being more proactive in our approach. And one of the main things we can do in being proactive is to care for our forests and to tell people the importance of caring for our forests and what they can do to help minimize the impacts of insects or diseases or wildfires. You know, many forests have their own resiliency, so to speak. They you know, our forests are tough. You know, they're not wimps. You know, I've never, you know, I've always said that a tree is as strong as its surroundings, and we can help that through, again, management and caretaking of our forests. This is another number slide, but again, about 29, almost 30% of our forests are on private land. And, you know, it says on this slide that 3.9 million forest acres are in the wildland urban interface. I think that's ticked up even a little bit, but again, about 4 million acres or so are in that WUI, and 50%, and I know now that number is higher, but over 50% of Colorado's population is in the wildland urban interface, is in the WUI, and that's significant. You know, I hope that number resonates with you guys, because as more and more people move into the forests and into that interface, it's even more critical that we are cognizant of the fire danger and the insects and disease potentials that we have. You know, I know that some areas are not as impacted by WUI, and maybe some of those areas we don't have to do as much managing on, or be, you know, have our footprint as big on those areas. But in the parts of the forest where we're seeing more and more homes and more people is where I think we need to do a better job at taking care of the trees and the forest makeup. This slide's a great slide, and I'm glad it's in here because it shows the importance of Colorado, particularly in the West. All of Colorado's water moves out of the state, and we feed about 19 states in the area with our rivers, streams, creeks, headwaters, and such. And so, you know, I talked about the recreation part of the forest, but certainly the watershed component is extremely important. And so I know we're trying to put forth this message more and more of how important our forest watersheds are, and that you know, if we look at that and share with people more the water tower that we are, I think it'll bring even more wide opened eyes to Colorado and its forests. I'm gonna pick it up here a little bit because I do want to leave some time for questions, but you know, I don't need to really focus on this slide too much, because you guys know that trees generate oxygen and they control erosion, and they recycle water and that sort of thing. But I do want to go through just a couple quick specifics on how these trees die. Insects, of course, kill the trees, and they kill the trees by two ways. They'll either strangle a tree or they'll starve a tree. They strangle a tree by girdling it, by eating the cambium layer right inside the bark. And if that layer goes away, that is such an important part of the tree that if that gets eaten or affected by wood borers or insects, then the tree again is in essence strangled. But then there are other insects that starve the tree. This is western spruce budworm, but also things like tent caterpillar and tussock moth. They'll strip a tree of its needles, of its foliage, or at least strip enough of it to where the tree can't support itself. And then, of course, will die. That's tent caterpillar. That talks about the life cycle, but I won't go into that again because of time. But how a beetle, particularly wood boring beetle, goes through 4 life stages: egg, larvae, pupae, and then adult. On this slide, I wanted to point out that you don't see mountain pine beetle because the mountain pine beetle epidemic is over for now. It will come back at some point, and hopefully it won't be as bad as it was in the earlier part of this 21st century. But we are still seeing significant impacts of spruce beetle. We're seeing some round-headed pine beetle, and then emerald ash borer. That's of course affecting our urban forests. You'd be surprised, maybe be surprised, at how many of our urban forests have an ash, a green ash, or some kind of ash component. And then, of course, we have western spruce budworm. On that first slide, I put our website, and I would encourage you to go to that website because it has things like this where we actually show, we map where insect and disease occurrences are happening. We're actually also mapping fires and those impacts, so you can see how you can spatially see how that is on this mapping that's on our website. But quickly, we have programs. One of the main things that I didn't mention that we do is we help through grant programs, through financial assistance. We have grant programs that help to reduce a fire danger, to restore forests to more of a pre-Western settlement, because as you probably know, our forests, again, are too thick. Many of our forests are too thick because we've been suppressing fire for so long. And so we have cost share programs that help with that. And we promote active forest management. This is a great slide because this was a patch cut in some lodgepole, and you see some natural lodgepole pine seedlings coming up. These are some of the tools of the trade. This was a thinning done in a ponderosa pine forest, but that's rare. In a lot of our trust me when I say this, in a lot of our ponderosa pine forests, you don't see that kind of spacing. You see a lot thicker density, again, because of suppressing fires. Fires used to come through, low intensity fires used to come through and naturally thin those forests, but because we've been suppressing them, they become overgrown. But that's a nice looking thin forest there. This is a before picture and an after picture. And of course, we also want to look at the wildlife and actively manage for that. And so we're not thinning all of our forests. We're not, looking at having a heavy impact. We're varying our impact. Let's just put it that way. And if you can see closely, there's a deer right there in the middle of that picture. This was a neat slide that Danielle had that I wanted to include because this was an avalanche, and you could see what that snow slide did with all that impact and putting those trees on the ground. Lastly, that's me and my son from right after the Hyde Park fire. He's not that young anymore, but we planted some seedlings at a spot right south of Stowe Prairie the Stowe Prairie School. I don't know how those seedlings turned out. I think we had decent survival, but anyway, that again, that was right after the Hyde Park fire. That's not the Cameron Peak fire. And then lastly, that's my email and my phone number. What I will say to you, John, is, and I've done this with other presentations, is if I don't get to all the questions, I will answer them through email. So let's be sure and do that I can get those questions through email, and I will be sure and answer them.
Like you, I always enjoy the question and answer parts the most. And we have received a few questions via the chat window. So Mike, the first question we have from Robin is, you mentioned the need to improve the age diversity of our forests, and Robin wants to know what can be done to do that. Age diversity.
Depending on the type of forest, usually it means thinning. You know, for forests that can have shade tolerant species, in other words, trees that will grow under the shade of other trees, then by thinning those forests, we'll get a regeneration underneath those older trees, and then we'll go to more of an age mix. We'll have not only mature trees, but submature or sapling size trees, seedling size. So usually it means some type of cutting or thinning to promote that age diversity. And that goes as well with species diversity as well.
Okay, because a second question was, how do you create more diversity in those lodgepole sort of monoculture forests that you mentioned?
Now, see, and now with lodgepole and aspen, because they are an early successional forest, and because they are a shade intolerant forest, one of the things you might have to do there is, rather than thin, is you might have to create little openings in those forests. And those openings can be as small as a half to a quarter acre. And the reason I say that is because when you have a shade intolerant species, if you thin it, you're not going to get regeneration underneath it because they don't like to grow in shade. So rather than do an individual type of tree cutting or thinning, you're opening up small patches. And like I say, it doesn't need to be a 20-acre opening. It can be literally a half an acre to a quarter acre. So you're breaking up that, you're having kind of that spotty type patchwork within your lodgepole or aspen forest.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Jesse wants to know, how involved does the Colorado State Forest Service get in the actual fighting of wildfires? Are you involved in that? What's your role, if any?
That's a good question. We used to have a bigger role in fire. We used to be the state fire agency, but about 7 years ago, a new division or a new department in the agency was born, and it's called the Division of Fire Prevention and Control. They're within the Department of Public Safety, and now they are the primary state firefighting agency. We work with them. We actually are here at our Foothills campus. We actually, share share the campus here with them. But you know, our role still is that we do send Colorado State Forest Service personnel to fires sometimes, but mainly we're talking about how to prepare for the instance of wildfire, what to do before that fire comes. We just finished a publication that talks about home ignition zones, and you know, some people have heard the term defensible space. Well, you're going to be, if you haven't heard about home ignition zone, you're going to be hearing more about that, because that's more of an all-encompassing area around those structures that are in our forests. And anyway, we talk about what to do in those home ignition zones to, again, lessen that fire danger and lessen that chance that that fire is going to affect or destroy that house. So basically, again, our role in fire has changed a little bit over the years. We still have a significant role, but just not as much in suppression.
Okay. Yeah, we have a few more questions here about the role of the service. So the first one is for a clarification. Does the Colorado State Forest Service, do you yourselves do restoration or thinning on private lands, or do you just provide landowners with management plans and advice?
The latter. We don't do any of the actual work ourselves, but we get folks connected with the people and the contractors that can do it. But I think a big part of that too is, though, that we help not only get that connection made, but we help again with those grant programs, that financial assistance.
Right. Because
I will tell you that forest management is expensive. I mean, it really is. There's no way to shy away from that. It's time consuming, it's laborious, and you know, for a lot of folks, it's important to them. But when it gets to be that expensive and you're putting your list together of what you need to do beyond forest management, you know, let's say you need to put a new roof on the house or whatever. The reality is that a lot of times the forest management falls lower in priority. And I get that. But again, that's why I think these cost share programs and these grant programs that we administer and that we help folks with are so important. The other thing is that we also try to get people to collaborate and get different groups, not only landowners, but groups to collaborate, to go in on it together, so to speak. Because when you can do that, you're going to get so much more, not only financially, I mean, yeah, you save so much bigger bang for the buck, but also just so much more done. You're going to get so much more outreach. So, you know, I see that, and I didn't say that much in my presentation, but I see that as a big part of my job these days, is to bring landowners and groups together in a collaborative effort to help get some of this needed management and this needed work done.
I I want to ask a clarifying question. Is the answer the same for state-owned lands? Do does the Colorado State Forest Service do the hands-on work on state-owned lands? Or is that also contracted?
No, that's also contracted.
Okay.
You know, I mean, I will say that on a very, very small scale, we've done some work in the past. Some offices have like chippers and means to do very small scale work on some state land, but it's really minuscule. I mean, most of the work, you know, 95+% of the work that's done on state properties are done through contracting. And I will say that, you know, in Colorado, we have a few different forms of state land ownership. We have state wildlife areas, which are managed by Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Then we have state parks, which are also managed by Colorado Parks and Wildlife, but they're two different. I mean, they're managed differently by CPW. Then there are state trust lands. Now, those are lands, they're usually a section, 640 acres in size. And a lot of times there's one within each township and range. And those state trust lands are overseen by the Colorado State Land Board. The purpose of those state trust lands are to generate revenue for public schools. So we actually do some forest management on some of those state trust lands. And if we are able to, let's say, sell some Christmas trees or some post and pole material, and up at our state forest up near Gould, they actually sell a lot of saw logs, then we can return some of that revenue to the state coffers for public schools. So anyway, if there are any questions there, I'll expand on that. But there are different state lands within Colorado, different types of state land.
Well, you sort of alluded to something that I think was a related question. One of our listeners asked, does the State Forest Service grow and sell trees?
Yes, I didn't, and I didn't, and I can talk for the next 20 minutes about the state nursery, but I won't. But we do have a Colorado State Forest Service nursery here in Fort Collins, where we grow seedling trees. And it's a great place. It's a great place to watch to bird. I know probably some of you maybe have come out here to the nursery to do that. I know Dave Leatherman has. But we do have the nursery here, and we grow seedlings, most of them from seed. We sow native seed, mostly native seed, and grow them into seedlings, either in greenhouses or out in fields. Most of the deciduous plants, both shrubs and trees, shrubs like chokecherries and mahogany and currant, and then trees like hackberry and honey locust, they're grown in the field from seed. Now, a deciduous tree like a willow or a cottonwood, they're grown from a cutting or a stick. So they're technically not grown from a seed, but they are grown in the field. Most of the evergreens are grown in containers, and they are started off from seed in a greenhouse. Now, not all of them, but most of them are. We have some cedar and juniper, even some spruce that are grown in fields, but we do get a better germination and better control of survival when we grow evergreens in the greenhouse. It used to be that you had to have 2 acres of land to buy our seedlings. That's no longer the case. You could have any kind of acreage to buy our seedlings. The only thing that the Colorado State Forest Service asks is that you plant them for conservation purposes. And what is meant by conservation purpose is anything that's not landscaping your home or something like that. We don't want to compete. The State Forest Service Nursery doesn't want to compete with private landscape nurseries. So anyway, I think we grow about close to 40 different species of tree and shrub. And yeah, it's a neat place that I like to promote and encourage people not only to purchase seedlings from, but to come out and visit. I mean, don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that you could come out anytime and just go through the nursery and do whatever. They're not that open, but I do know that there are times that they give tours and that they do let people come out and walk the grounds. It's almost 240 acres, if you can believe that. It's right here at the corner of Overland Trail and LaPorte Avenue. So, and again, great place to see all kinds of wildlife, lots of birds, but all kinds of wildlife. So
yeah, I got to lead a field trip there a few years ago, Mike. You all let us take a group out there one Saturday morning, and it was fantastic. Let's see. We do have
I'll say one more thing on the nursery, John, is that a lot of people get frustrated that when they call to get seedlings in the spring, that they're out of a lot of species. And I just want to throw this out that though people don't get their trees until the spring, ordering starts in the fall, usually about November 1st. So I always tell people, get your orders in the fall, because then you'll be more assured that you're going to get the species and the quantities that you want. So
okay.
That's my spiel on ordering. So
insider tip. We got a few more questions here, Mike, if you have time.
I do. I have plenty of time.
So Bob says, considering that timbering is one mechanism for managing forest health, how does the amount of timbering today compare with 20 to 30 years ago?
Well, if I'm hearing the question right, we don't cut as much timber today as we did 30 years ago. We don't have as many mills or processors now that we than we did those many years ago. And there's a number of reasons why, which I'm not going to go all into, but I will say that when you don't have people that can use or entities that can use a product from the forest, it makes forest management very difficult, and as I mentioned earlier, very expensive, because no one wants to, if no one wants to cut a board out of a tree, or no one wants to turn a tree into a post or a pole, then that landowner is going to have to pay for that management, or that thinning, or the caring for that forest. But honestly, we are seeing some comeback of timbering or use of our trees. And what I mean by that is, we've seen more use of wood for heating. And I'm not talking about firewood, although firewood has picked up a lot. We actually have, and I'm going to digress here for a second, but we have here just north of LaPorte, one of the biggest firewood operators in the not only the state, but the region. If you've ever seen those bundles of firewood at Safeway or King Supers or any of the stores, those plastic covered little bundles, they're made here in LaPorte. They cost what, about $5 for a little bundle, and that gentleman creates over 2 million of those bundles each year, and he does it by cutting dead trees, mainly beetle killed trees, and turning them into those bundles. So we've seen an upsurge in that. We've seen an upsurge in just bioenergy. People putting in wood chip boilers. There's also another product called biochar, which again I won't go all into, but it's creating charcoal out of just wood, using nothing else, just wood, and turning it into a soil amendment. And those are key, because the main thing about Colorado's forests are our trees are small, and our trees grow slow. And I say that in comparison to most all other states. Most all other states have much taller trees, much fatter trees, larger trees, and they just grow quicker. So it's important to have a use, what I call a low quality wood use for our trees. And so firewood or woody biomass, wood chips, or biochar are kind of fitting that bill. And we're seeing more and more of that. And I hope we continue to see more and more of that, because if we do see more use of that low quality wood, that small wood, then we're going to see more opportunity to take care of our forests. And we're going to see the costs of managing our forests go down. I don't know if that was a direct answer to that question, John, but.
Oh, I think you answered it.
Yeah.
We've got, I think, 3 more questions, and all 3 have to do with fire.
Okay.
So the first one from Ann asks, how much of the Colorado State Forest State Park was affected by the Cameron Peak fire? And I think she's asking about trails and campsites and of course the forest itself.
I don't have an exact number, but it was very, very, very small. It really did not jump the divide. It crept a little bit in some areas, but the actual Forest State Park up there at Gould was really not affected by the Cameron Peak fire. Now, just east of there, the Raywa Wilderness, the Chambers Lake area, those areas, of course, were significantly impacted. And I honestly don't know if those areas are open and if they are still closed, when they will open. I know some parts of the areas that were affected by Cameron Peak, or a lot of the areas that were affected by Cameron Peak, are still closed. And I have not heard anything from the U.S. Forest Service about when they'll reopen up. And it really depends on how significantly the fire impacted that area. I'll say this, that when you hear that number, that 209,000 acres were affected by the Cameron Peak fire, that's a big number. But remember that not all of that acreage burned. There were lots of islands and lots of spots within that 209 acre perimeter that didn't burn, or burned very, very low in intensity.
Okay. The next question is, do you have any idea how the Cameron Peak fire affected, or how it will affect bird populations and distribution?
That I don't know, because I would defer to some of you all who know a little bit more about wildlife and about birds. I don't know more than to say that obviously it's going to have an impact. It'll have an impact more on some birds than others. I will say that, judging from the Hyde Park fire of 2012, I did see a lot of the woodpecker populations increase because there was a lot more beetle activity, dendrochonous beetles that feed on dead wood, and the predators really took advantage of that. But overall, it's going to have a negative impact, but get more specific in that, I don't know, John.
Okay, fair enough. Mike, the last question that I have in front of me is asking whether the State Forest Service has any influence in policies and regulations about people moving into that wildland urban interface.
We don't.
It's not asking if you regulate, but whether you have any influence in those policies and regulations.
We do not. All that we do, we do talk to not only the state legislature, but different county and municipalities about the about the effects of that movement, about what to be ready for, what the impacts are. But so, I mean, I guess you could say it's an indirect effect. We don't have a direct effect, but we have an effect in that we try to convey to, again, this, not only folks in Denver, the state legislator, but really at the county level, to tell folks what those impacts are going to look like by that continuing movement. And I've seen some counties and even more local areas take that information and use it, and actually they'll actually curb some of that growth or that influx when they get that information. You know, I'll say that you know, I think looking at it today in 2021 versus looking at it, say, back in 1991 or even 2001, it's a lot different. Yes, there are a lot more people moving into the urban interface, but I'm seeing a lot more awareness from local planning departments and county planning and zoning entities that are saying, whoa, you know, we've got to address this. We've got to address this movement. And you know, I'll tell you, give you an example. One of the things I've done over these last few months, more so than I've ever done before, is the town of Estes Park now requires a fire mitigation plan for any, not only new construction, but let's say you wanted to add a garage or just a small addition to the back of your house. Well, the town of Estes Park now requires that you have a fire mitigation plan before you're allowed to do that. So things are changing. And it just, a lot of times it depends on the county or the town you're talking about, but yeah. But we don't have any direct impact on that.
Okay. Well, this would be last call for questions, but I haven't seen any additional ones typed in there. Mike, I want to thank you for sharing your time and your expertise with us tonight. I think this is an issue that really affects all of us, probably some people more than others, but as you've made those connections to our water quality and recreation and the economy and all those things really clear, I'm sure that all of us appreciate the work that the State Forest Service does. Thank you for your time with us tonight. And just a reminder to all of tonight's attendees that we're signing off till September. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram to keep up with what's going on in all things related to Fort Collins Audubon Society. I hope everyone enjoyed tonight's program. Thank you for attending, and we will see you in September, if not sooner.
Thank you,
Thanks,
John.
all.